Okay, we're live. Oh, I have to remove. I always put X as one of our streaming things, and I don't know why I keep doing it because I don't think our X account is connected, and I don't know how to do that. And who's on X anyway? So I
Yeah,
don't know.
I think
But
YouTube is a good catch-all. You can come here; it's easy. Yeah.
but every time I hit go live, it's like we can't go live to X, and I'm like,
Okay.
I kind of don't care. All right. But I have to go and take it out every single time. So, hello, everyone. How I know we chit chat for a couple minutes. So, how is everybody doing today? Put it in the chat. How are you doing, Alisa?
I'm good. Trying to adjust to this crazy time change. My brain does not work with this springing ahead. So, still trying to get, back on whatever the real time is. I missed the lunar eclipse. Did you see it last night at like 3 o'clock in the morning?
I didn't see it at 3 o'clock in the morning. I did take a walk last night right at dusk, and the moon was high and had this like tint of pink to it, which I thought was very pretty. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, missing X equals missing nothing.
For sure. Missing a lot of screaming magic.
I feel bad speaking ill of something, but I don't feel so bad either. So I don't know. Oh, but I'm glad everybody is here. Just while we're waiting for maybe another minute or two while people roll in, I will say I got a rejection this morning. I woke up this morning to a rejection, which is the best part of pitching anything, right?
I did check my writing email. I like to call it Schrodinger's inbox because it does not chirp my phone. So I never know if there's a rejection or something positive, or there was nothing this morning. But was that an agent or one of the presses?
No, it was an agent. So an agent who I actually just pitched yesterday. And so I love it when you get, even though it was a rejection, it happened real fast, which I appreciate because then I can just mark them off my list and keep going.
Yeah, that didn't get lost in the void. Yeah.
Yes. So, all right. Well, let's get rolling. I know Doug always waits a good 5 minutes before he starts, but I think I'm just too excited and or impatient, I think, to wait that long. So, welcome everybody who's here. I see B and Aaron and SY and Kara are all in the chat. So, welcome, even if you're not participating in the chat, that is A-okay. I'm Abby Mathews. I'm Dabble's community manager over in the Storycraft Cafe. And this is my dear friend, Alisa.
Hi, everyone. I am writing and querying presses and agents, and the rejections keep coming in, but I still have one full request out with an agent, so fingers crossed. And it was really cool doing this deeper dive on small presses to get a little bit more comfortable, I think, with pitching them too. So
yeah. So I think the important thing to talk about here is we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk with you guys on this one. This week alone, I ended up pitching 3 agents and 4 small presses. So I think I ended up with 6 small presses total on my list that I think would fit my book. Because finding a press is kind of a lot like finding an agent. You have to find somebody that takes what you write. And 4 of those were open to submissions. 2 were not. They were going to open later in the year is what they, and they both gave dates. So I marked my calendar. So anyway, we're here today to talk about small presses, which I really think is, and I don't know why it's not a very talked about option for people who want to be traditionally published. I think really up until the point you started pursuing them, Alisa, I had sort of just ignored it as an option anyway, because this was how the conversation always went. They're like, yes, you pitch agents and you do this and you do that and agents. Oh yeah, and also you can do a small press. And then they gloss right over that as an option. And I don't know if it's just because it was in the past. not something that a lot of people did. Only a few people did it, so maybe a lot of people didn't know about it. You kind of have some thoughts on that and why more people are pitching them these days, don't you?
Yeah, and for me, I was in the same boat as you. Like, I just never really thought about it. And it was actually a writer friend of a friend who was picked up by a small press, and she was telling me about his experience, and I was like, okay, because I think there's a lot of crazy information out there, and there are a lot of scams. So I think in some ways it's like, okay, the safest route is to go with agents and in that way. And unfortunately, there's some sketch people calling themselves agents who aren't. So at this point, you just have to be on your, game, looking for those red flags, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But recently, I think small presses are kind of becoming more of an option that more people are looking at, because it does offer that traditional contract where you're not paying anything up front. You may or may not get an advance, but you will get royalties. And as the big five is kind of shrinking and becoming super, specialized in what they write, I think these small presses have an opportunity to fill that gap where some of the big publishers aren't picking up books in the same way that they used to. Yeah. So that's kind of been my focus, is like, let's put it out there. And also, sometimes if you get an offer from a press and you have an agent that seems interested, you might be able to go back to them and say, like, hey, I have this interest, like, what do you think about my story now? Kind of a situation. So,
you know what? You and I were talking about that earlier this week, and I was like, no, like, when would that ever happen? Is like what I'm thinking in my head. I don't know if you listened to the Storycraft Cafe podcast this week, but Hank interviewed an author who is traditionally published with a romantasy book. I believe her name was Alex Kensington. Anyway, she talks about how she had queried 100 agents. She had had a total of 3 full requests out of those 100 agents. The last agent that still had her full, she also pitched a small press who made her an offer. She went back to the agent and said, I have an offer from a small press. Are you still considering my book? And the agent said, give me a week to read it. She finished and she came back and she said, I want to represent your book. I think I can get you a better deal than you were offered if you go with me. Now, she did not say, I will represent you for the small press. She said, I think I can get you a better offer if you go with me. And Alex said she thought about it for a couple of weeks before she decided, because she was very torn between the two. It was like a bird in the hand, right? Is worth 2 in the bush, but she ultimately ended up going with the agent and ended up with a bigger deal. So I think you can use it as a bargaining chip, because right after we talked about it, I was like, oh my gosh, the universe is throwing all this information in front of us. So
yeah, that's great. And it's tricky, because you have this guaranteed contract. But the opportunity for me, like, to have an agent who's not just saying, I'm going to represent you for this book, but like really taking me on as a client, like, that's a long-term relationship, which that's what I'm looking for. Like, I'd really like to have an agent, a partner, to kind of work through stuff. So if this is a different way to get to that point, at least as long as I still have one like full manuscript request out there, I feel like I can go back to that person and say, hey, here's what's happening. What do you think? And kind of go from there.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up a good point too about getting your foot in the door. That's why I would really like to, pitch some of these small presses. The couple that I pulled out were actually ones that had kind of an educational bend to them, because being a former high school educator, it's always been sort of on my mental marketing plan for any of my books to do school visits, but not just do school visits about my story or about creative writing, but there's almost always a science bend to my books as well. And I would love to write a nonfiction companion to go along with my, my fictional novel. And so some of these small presses had like kind of an educational piece to them that I'm like, wow, I actually think they would be really, really good fits for what it is that I want to do. And so, Anyway, do we want to jump into our presentation?
Yeah, I am seeing a little bit of chat about paying up front. Okay.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Clarify. So if it is a traditional press and a traditional contract, you will not be asked to pay something. Now, just because you are asked to pay something doesn't mean it's a scam, because there are hybrid publishers and there are small publishers that also offer author services, which you pay for, but you're not publishing with them. So it gets very convoluted. But when you're thinking of a traditional deal, the author does not pay anything up front, and you get either an advance in royalties or just royalties, or that I don't think of any other financial situations. Something new could come up, of course, but if it's truly a traditional deal, small press, large press, you will not be asked to pay anything.
I have seen a couple of these small presses that also have hybrid wings.
Yes.
And if they are not willing to take on the risk of your book, they do offer you the option to take, advantage of their services for a fee. And that's something I think you'd really have to look into. I don't know if anyone here is actually part of the premium subscription for Dabble. You have access to the premium space in the community, in the Storycraft Cafe. And I actually did a series of, I think it was 5 posts about hybrid publishing and what to look for and what is it and what are the red flags and things like that. So you can go over there and find that. I think it's pretty easy to find. You can just search hybrid publishing up in the search bar and those posts will come up. Well, things you need to know before you pitch a small press, and this is for fiction. So Alisa and I both write fiction. Nonfiction is a little bit of a different beast. I believe you can still get picked up by a traditional publisher, and I cannot speak necessarily to small presses specifically, but traditional publishers will pick you up if you have a platform and a table of contents and some sample chapters, and you got your stuff together and the book's not written. You can still get picked up with those things. However, for fiction, you cannot. And memoir falls under the fiction umbrella for publishing. So we're talking about fiction, and we're also talking about memoir here. I can say that while looking through these small presses, I saw several of them would take memoir. They'll take short story anthologies that are done by a single author. I've seen some that I think even take novellas, not even full-length novels. So if you're writing something along those veins, I think you can definitely find a small press who will take you. And we're talking about fiction. So first things first, you do need that finished manuscript. So just like agents, if they're interested, they might want your full now, right? So if they write back and they say, can I see your full manuscript? And you don't have it, you don't want to blow your chance, okay? So this process does seem to be slower than pitching agents. I do see many of these small presses say that they'll get back to you in 6 months and 4 months. So that's a long time. And you might think, gee, I can finish my manuscript in that time.
But they might ask you the next day. So you just never know.
Right. And I guess what I have to say about that is if they do come back to you and they ask you for your full, I try and respond within the standard 48-hour professional email return window. I can say that the first time I was asked for my full by an agent, I literally saw the email come in on my phone and I set a timer for 20 minutes before I responded with my full, because I didn't want to seem too overly eager, but
right.
I don't know that 20 minutes really cut a lot off that over eagerness, but
that's great. The first time I got one, I just cried. I just burst into tears because I was just oh my God, it's here. And then I was like, tomorrow, because I don't need to be trying to make sure I have everything she wants while I'm kind of freaking out. So give it to the next day.
Yeah. And I think that's the piece that everybody needs to remember is you don't have to respond immediately. right? But you do have to respond in a very professional time frame, and that does not mean you respond weeks later when you have finished your manuscript. Okay, so let's see. The next thing you do have to have is a query letter, and so the dreaded query letter.
You can't get away from it. It's impossible.
You cannot get away from it. And so if you do not know what a query letter is, Alisa and I just actually did a whole query letter workshop last week. And you can find that replay in the Storycraft Cafe or on our YouTube channel. But even if they don't ask for a traditional query letter, right, they're going to most likely ask you for all the same information that goes in a query letter, just in a different form or a different format. So, you have to have your hook, your logline, your pitch, whatever you want to call it, right? You have to have your book details. So your genre, your word count. This is super important too, because a lot of these small presses are very genre specific, like they specialize. You have to be prepared with your jacket copy. So your jacket copy is what, 200-300 words.
Yeah.
That doesn't give away the ending, doesn't give away any plot twists, but it's just enough. It's like the back of the book. What are you going to tempt someone to pick up your book and read? That's the jacket copy. And your bio with any writing credits, if you have any. And you might not have any, and that's totally okay. We talked about that in our query letter workshop last week as well. So beyond that, something that we haven't talked about yet is the synopsis, which if there's anything harder than writing the query letter, I'm just going to say, I think it's the synopsis. It's 1 or 2 pages that literally gives away your whole book. You have to give it all. You have to give the major plot points. You have to give the twist. You have to give away the ending. You do not have to cover subplots. You do not have to cover all the characters. You're just focused on the meat of your story. Because even if you have written 100,000 word novel, they still want you to get it down to 500 words, right? So that is, I have a feeling I hear you clicking away. Are you putting something in the chat?
Yes, I have a very clicky keyboard. It's beautiful. It's purple. You guys will be shocked to see. But it's very clicky, so I'm trying to gently, and then I hit enter by accident. So BI will finish that sentence here in just a second.
So I do have 2 versions of my synopsis. And I think, Alisa, you said you have 2 versions of yours as well. I have one that is 500 words or less, because I have very specifically seen people ask for 500 words or less. And I have one that's about 800 words, which is the max that I've seen, agents in particular say that they will take. So I have a longer one and I have a shorter one. But the whole thing focuses on the main plot. Like I said, you can touch on a subplot, but you don't have to go into them. You give away the twist, you give away the ending, you give them all the spoilers, because what they want to know is, do you have all the elements that you're promising in your jacket copy in your manuscript before I spend hours or days reading 100,000 words? I want to make sure that you've got everything that you need. And then last are your sample pages. And this is going to vary widely. So in the 4 presses that I pitched this week, 2 of them asked for the full manuscript right out of the gate. One of them asked for the first 10 pages, and I think the other asked for the first 50 pages.
And I had one that asked for 5 chapters, however long that ended up being,
Yeah. So, again, like I said before, this is why you got to have your manuscript done, because you might find that they want the whole thing right out of the gate. And I thought this was really interesting too. The 2 presses that asked for the full manuscript when I pitched them, they asked for it via email. So I put Boomerang, which is the email tracking program that you can use. I put Boomerang on my email just to see if it gets opened, because that's the one thing about sending anything by email is you always think, did I just throw it out into the void? Did anybody get it? Both of them were opened within an hour of me sending them. So that made me feel better. But I also, unlike an agent, didn't expect to hear right back, because they have the full manuscript. So it's going to take them a while to decide whether or not they want it. All right, so let's talk about some of the red flags. And we've already touched on this a little bit from the chat. So reader fees. So reader fees, it's just like hybrid publishing. You have to be really savvy and you have to look for these predatory practices. Like I recently saw a press when I was doing a deep dive on some different presses so that I could make a list in the Storycraft Cafe. I saw one that had a $20 submission fee. And I didn't know what that was all about, but I immediately closed the tab and moved on.
And you can find sometimes submission fees for contests. So that's different kind of publishing, but a contest, I think you would expect to make sure the contest feels legit. Like Writer's Digest runs them, you know that they're legit.
Yeah.
So you will find some if you're submitting to a contest, but not really if you're submitting directly to a press.
Yeah, I agree. So if you see something that has a reader fee, just move right along. Close that tab like I did. If the press reaches out to you, so as much as this would be like a complete dream come true, how does someone just magically know you have a finished book sitting on your computer? Like, I mean, maybe you've been very vocal about it on social media. I don't know, but I question, like, how would they know? Did they steal my data?
And sometimes this will happen if you have published on, say, Amazon.
Okay.
There's a very tiny percentage of people where it is legitimate. So I hate to always be like, yes, but I literally, yesterday, I think, Writer's Digest sent out an email like with this article about a woman who had published her book, and then presses did actually reach out to her to traditionally publish her book. But that's like a 1 in a billion thing. And she talked in that article about how much research she did after that to verify that it was legit, because that just really doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially if you haven't published anything and it's like, hello, like you're on a mailing list or something that somebody sold to someone who is sketchy. So just really huge red flags if someone reaches out to you.
I have to say that I was working with a writer, it was probably about a year ago, who he came to me and he was so excited because a press had reached out to him, and it was a hybrid press, and they wanted to publish his book. And it was like a, $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 contract, whatever it was that they wanted him to pay, in order to do this. And he was all excited. He was so touched because he felt singled out, like he felt chosen, which is what we all want, is to feel chosen in this, especially by this stage in your writing when you have something finished and you really want to get it out there in the world. And he was so excited that he let that excitement blind him to the facts that, this was somebody who was actually trying to prey on it, to take advantage. And what I had him do was Google the name of the hybrid. I'm going to put hybrid press because when we Googled it, we found like there was a Better Business Bureau complaint against them. Then the website said it was in one city, but then if you clicked on something else on the website, it claimed it was in another city. And like we had all these little pieces that the more we dug and dug and dug, like nothing looked legitimate. And so I think you really have to do that. And I'm sad to say this, but I'm going to share this with all of you. My short list of small presses that take middle grade and middle grade fantasy specifically, there was one that was on my list that I had all my submission materials ready. I thought their website looked pretty legitimate. I looked through their catalog. I clicked on some of the books that had been published. I thought, they looked great. And just before I hit submit, I was like, I don't think I Google searched this one. I'm going to Google search it. And so I did. And what came up immediately, I put the name of the press and then I put reviews. And what came up was a list of complaints where authors, both agented and unagented, were complaining that they didn't pay out their royalties in a timely manner. And some of the authors were saying it had been 2 years since they had received a royalty payment from this particular press. And I thought, bullet dodged. I mean, that I think can happen with any press. I mean, I've heard authors frequently complain about not having timely royalty payments, but I'm just going to save myself that trouble. And so I crossed that X out, and I already had everything put together. I was like, oh man, wasted time.
And I would even say doing this research on the front end is even better, because you could be like, I'll just wait till later, but you're going to be so excited to hear back from them that I feel like we would all be maybe more willing to let something slide. So doing this level of research on the front end, I think, just helps protect us. Because it's going to be such an emotional reaction when you get that yes, that we might overlook stuff, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah, God, absolutely. So the last thing that we've kind of got on this little list here, it's an unprofessional website, which I'm going to say this. It's not just the website. Look at the books that have come out from the press. For me, and again, my background is in fine arts, I look at the covers. If the covers of the books that they have put out look like something that I would be embarrassed to put my name on, I X out that tab too. I cross them off my list, because again, I don't want to be faced with a yes and the excitement, and then have something put out that maybe is not up to my own personal standards. I don't know. How do you feel about that, Alisa? What's your way of testing if something is unprofessional or not?
Yeah, that definitely. Or if the links don't work, or you keep getting like rerouted, or something just feels a little bit off. I mean,
it's all out of date.
Out of date, definitely. If all their links or all their like referencing things are 10 years ago, then that's probably not a good sign. Definitely grammatical mistakes and things like that, because a real press that's how they get their name out there. So they're going to want to look as professional as possible. Also, if they talk about having published lots of books, but you can't find any evidence of them actually publishing books, then that obviously is a huge too.
Well, there was one press that I looked at that I liked the motto, I liked the mission of the press. I sort of liked their vibe. They were not necessarily brand new, but they had been around, I think, 3 or 4 years. So long enough. But when you search through their website, I think I only saw like 8 books that had been published. And I couldn't find the back catalog. And so I was just like, there was something about it that gave me pause. And I Googled it, and I tried to find other places where this press was mentioned. And I just wasn't finding a ton. And it was just enough to make me go,
Absolutely. So. And B had posted in the comments that she found 55 pages of small publishers, right? So there are a lot of them might be sketchy, but this isn't your only opportunity. So if something's not hitting you right, move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I guess I did have another bullet on our list. Many of the same red flags people might see with hybrid publishers, which we did mention that earlier, that there's some crossover here between small presses and hybrid publishers, but it's going to be all the same red flags. And you brought up a great website. So if anybody has never been to Writer Beware, are they still operating that site, or is it mostly? I don't know why I felt like maybe the person who runs it stopped for some reason.
It's housed under the science fiction, and for some reason it's not letting me post the link. I'll put it in the community. It seems pretty up to date. I was just looking at it the other day. So I think
I must be thinking of something else.
Yeah, it might have changed hands a little bit, but I believe the woman's name's Victoria. And I mean, I still see her active on social media and people sending her information. The link I'll post in the community is specifically about small presses.
Okay.
It's got tons of other information too. And you can even kind of search on the site for the publisher or agent even that you're looking at. To see if they come up anywhere. So it's not going to catch everything again, but especially that small presses segment, it's pretty lengthy, but there's some great information about what to be on the lookout for.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about finding a good fit, right? So, you know what to look for now, if it's legitimate or not, but which press should you choose? Who should you pitch? But it's just like researching agents. You have to find one that takes what you write. And so step one, go to their website and see if they state their wish list. Many of these presses will tell you, and by the way, when you go to the press, most of these websites, you're going to see forward facing what readers see for most of them. This kind of took me a hot minute to get used to, because when you go to an agency website or agents, it's really easy to find who the agents are and what those agents are looking for. But these presses, you're going to go and you're looking at it the way a reader is, somebody looking for books, a teacher, a librarian. You're just going to see books, whatever it is that they've got up for sale now. That's what you're going to see. And I've realized you have to scroll most of the time down to the bottom and hit where it says contact. That's where they're hiding away things, because this is not the place where they're shouting out, come and pitch us, everyone. Their landing page is for selling. So you have to really dig down deep to find their submissions pieces. So you're looking for the words contact, you're looking for the words about. If you click the word authors, it doesn't mean authors looking to publish for us. It means the authors that we already publish. So usually author is not the word you're looking for, but contact will take you to a lot of the submissions materials. And they will very plainly state whether or not they take unagented submissions. And those are the keywords you're looking for, unagented submissions, right? And you're looking for some sort of wish list, or they'll just say, we only take science fiction. We only take nonfiction. We only take nonfiction cookbooks. We only take, whatever it is. There are some that only take children's books. Some that only take children's picture books, right? So you have to know your genre well enough to try and figure out, are they going to take what it is that we want? And if they don't explicitly state it, so Alisa, you and I found this one. Looks like it's playing. We went to this particular website last week, and they did not say specifically that they were only nonfiction. But when we scrolled through their catalog, you guys can see it's like all cookbooks, and then childhood trauma recovery workshop, courage to walk away. I can't even read that one. Something about ADHD. Yeah, the new Muslim workbook, toxic mold solution. I mean, obviously, they are only taking nonfiction books. So we scrolled all the way through that catalog, and we didn't see a single fiction book. So, cross that off your list. The other thing is, you have to make sure that even within your genre, they take whatever flavor it is that you write. So let's look at this one. So this is Dragon Bone Publishing, all right? And Alisa and I went back and forth like 10 rounds whether or not she should pitch this small press. Did you end up pitching it?
I did. Thank you for the encouragement, because I wouldn't have. I was like, it doesn't fit. And then, as I was working on what they specifically wanted, I was like, maybe it does actually fit. So thank you.
Yeah. So, first of all, just look at the vibe of this website. So I write fantasy. Alisa writes fantasy. We write two very different flavors of fantasy. And while yours is not high fantasy, so to me, this website screams high fantasy.
Yeah, epic. Yeah, for sure.
Dragons, dark fantasy. Like, I mean, it's definitely got a vibe to it. But you have a much more, I'd say, traditional fantasy magic. There's the bad guy that traps souls. There's all these things that I think fit this flavor better than me, where my fantasy is more like I've taken one of the mythical brownies from, British folklore, and I've put them in a barnyard setting where they cause trouble. So totally different. So when we look at this, like, they go into their subgenres, they talk about fantasy and sci-fi and what they're looking for, experimental fiction and works of passion. So they really did, I think, a good job of breaking this down. And then we also, and I wore my glasses today, you guys, or not my glasses, my contacts, and I really need cheaters. So I'm going to lean in real close while I try and read some of this very, very small print. When you find their submissions, the other thing that you need to look for are all the details. And this website, more than most of them, really broke it down beautifully for what it is that they're looking for. What's their deadline? So this particular press, it opened to submissions to the public on February 1st. And Alisa, you said you knew when they were closing because you looked at their social media, correct?
Yeah, social media, and actually their form where you actually submit had the deadline on it too. So end of the month, if anyone out there has fantasy or sci-fi ready to roll, you could submit by March 31st.
Yeah. I've seen this with a lot of the presses too. They really harp on word counts because your word count directly ties to your publishing costs. Submission length, they want this particular one has formatting. It gives you the genres. It gives you the content. It says no AI content. It tells you like how many times you could submit. It tells you where to submit. So, I mean, it does a nice job of breaking it all down. And then right here, it says full manuscript request, have a PDF of your full manuscript ready to go. So at their request. So I think this gives you a really good idea of what the process is. But I also want to tell you guys to set your expectations. So, by the way, yeah, you guys can see my thing. If you wanted to know which press I almost submitted and Googled. So just look into it is all I have to say if you decide to go that way. But I wanted you guys to look at these timelines. And this is what I mean by set your expectations. So this one right here, it says, you may assume after 6 months, we're not interested in publishing your work. This one says 4 months. After 4 months, you should hear from them. And I think this is, even though I still feel like I'm a little early in my, I guess, season of pitching. I've only pitched, 30 something agents total. I went ahead and decided to go ahead and pitch these small presses because if it takes months to hear back from them, in the meantime, I'm going to keep pitching those agents. It's like I planted that tree now so that maybe it'll bloom later. And so that was sort of my timeline that I thought about. But so where to find these presses? Google, I think, is really, really the best. Reedsy had some. Duotrope was another website that I saw. So Duotrope is great. You have to have a subscription to it. And I have a subscription to it. But it will tell you things like people who are looking for articles that they want you to write. If you're writing articles, it has a lot of short stories, submission calls for submissions. It has a lot of magazines. So if you want to write a short story piece and have it put in a magazine, but it also has call outs for small presses, and it has some agents that have a presence on there. And so that's a great site. I did find some websites for authors who would aggregate lists of small presses, and many of those would have a flavor to it. So I did find one that was like 50 small presses that all take children's lit. So that was one that, of course, then I started combing through. I've seen lists for fantasy and science fiction. That's another really big one. There's a list. I think I Googled the other day a list for romance just to see what I could find. Harlequin. Did you know that you can pitch Harlequin? And I was like, yeah, man, that's like classic romance, those red cover books. My mom used to hide them in a box under the bed. I was like.
And Entangled, if you're fans of Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, Onyx Storm, like they published that and they don't require agented submissions. Abby started a thread in the community with different presses and I put that information there. So yeah, you can find like legit presses to submit to without agents, which is just really cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. So let's talk for a minute, kind of, this is our last thing, and then we'll open it up to some questions. Who should pitch small presses? Like, who should consider it? I mean, you most likely aren't going to get as big a deal, I think, as some of the larger presses. For me, it's less about how much money am I going to make off this first book, because I know I've heard Hank say it, I've heard Doug say it, I've heard a lot of people say it. It takes a while to make a lot of money, or any money really, off of your first book. It's kind of like you're building that runway for your career. And so I was less interested about the deal and more interested about getting my foot in the door. But I've also heard people say that they're considering small presses because maybe they only have one book in them and they're not really interested in writing a second book, but they wrote a first one. They put their whole heart into it. They were so excited. They did it. They crossed it off their bucket list. Now they want it out into the world. They're not interested in necessarily learning how to publish or the business side of things to become an indie published author. I feel like you have to be an authorpreneur if you go that route. They just want to get their book out there. So this is, I think, a great option for them. But how about you, Alisa? Why did you decide to start pitching the small presses in the first place?
Yeah, it was kind of a combination of things. I had queried a lot of agents for that previous book that is out there right now, and it just wasn't getting a lot of, feedback, lots of rejections. And then, like I said, my friend who had an acquaintance who went with a small press and was really pleased with the process, I was like, maybe I should start looking into this. And then definitely that connection with wrapping back around to an agent who has your full manuscript, they obviously had some level of interest. So I would definitely, use that as that springboard to talk to that person. Now, I wouldn't go back to people who I had received rejections from unless their rejections had something so specific about wanting me to submit more stuff. But typically, if someone still has your full, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the main thing. I ran my own business for a decade, and so I want to also step away from that side of the business. I want to focus on writing. And while any author is going to have to market their book, I like having that support of a full professional organization, person, whatever, behind me in supporting that process.
And, I think that's a good point to point out too, though, is, if you're indie published, you still want all those things, but you're like the president of the company. So you have to seek them out. You have to find them. You have to pay them. You have to do all the things. And that's great when you have that drive and you're in control and you like the business part. I mean, it's a project. It's totally a project.
For sure.
And I have to say that, there is a big part of that appeals to me. I like the idea of, I want to interview cover designers and I want to look at different book formatters and see who I like. And I want to be in charge of making those decisions. I think, unfortunately for me, the piece that really is pushing me towards traditional in the first place is the fact that middle grade tends to do much better traditionally published than they do indie published, just because there are so many gatekeepers. But there is something for me that appeals to me, but it does not appeal to everyone. And so, that's something to sort of kind of take into consideration. So, are there questions? I haven't looked at the chat in a while. I know you've probably been looking at the chat, Alisa.
Yeah,
I should have told you you can mark with little stars anything that's a question that you want to come back to. But let's see. I'm going to turn off my presentation.
I think we addressed most of it here. Yes, Bob, there will be a replay. Abby will post that in the community. Let's see.
So, all right, let's see. Okay, so Kara, I like this. Kara says she greatly prefers working with small presses. She will never seek out an agent, nor will I seek out publication with a major publishing house. This information is still pertinent to me. So, yeah, Kara, I love that you've had a really good experience with this. And I know you're one of our community members too. If you want to post a little bit about what you've done and what your experience is. I mean, if you want to put it here in the chat, we can share it over the course of this conversation. But if not, if you want to bring it over into the community, I think that would be great. I want to hear more about people that have had, I think, a really good experience with this, because it makes me feel like I'm on the right path. So his advice was, oh, okay. So SY says she was advised by a well-respected Irish novelist to go to a small press. His advice is that if your book sells well, a bigger press is likely to notice and to pick it up. So again, that's like that whole idea of getting your foot into the door. I think that's kind of, for me at least, important. So, okay, a hybrid writer. Let's answer this question. So a hybrid writer can actually mean two different things depending on who you're talking to. A hybrid writer, sometimes people call themselves that when they are both traditionally published and they have a series or a set of books that they independently publish as well. So they have their foot in both worlds, traditional and indie publishing. So my girlfriend, Libby Hawker, calls herself a hybrid writer. So Libby has a traditional contract that she publishes under one name, and then she has a pen name that she publishes all of her self-published books under, and they each have kind of a little bit of a different flavor to them. But she's got 50-something books published, okay, between the two. And I have a friend, Ruth Cardello, who does the same thing. She's a hybrid writer because she has her foot in both worlds. Ruth publishes 4 books every year. 2 go under her traditional contract and 2 go under her indie name. And so that's one way when you hear people say a hybrid writer, that's what it is. But then there are also presses that call themselves hybrid presses. And what they are sort of like a mix between traditional and self-publishing. You go to the press has their own sort of team already put together. They have a book formatter that's on staff. They have a cover designer on staff. They have their own developmental editors on staff. So you basically, as the writer, you pay them to put together the team and pay for their services, and they put the book together for you and they launch it out into the world. So it is now, printed, ebook, whatever. A lot of times they handle distribution, or you pay an extra fee for the distribution. But in exchange, they still take a royalty, but instead of you as the writer getting 15 or 20% the way you would in a normal traditional contract, you walk away with 80, they get 20. So it sort of flip-flops because you have upfronted the money and the risk associated with the book. So you've paid for your first print run, you've paid for all your editing services, you've paid for the design services, you've paid for everything there. So
I think a good point between a legitimate hybrid press and a not so legitimate one is, do they take everybody or not?
Yeah.
They have a submissions process that's just like every other press. They're not just taking everyone who shows up looking. That's a good sign, because you want them to be picky. If it's just, here, submit your thing, let's get started, here's a contract for $10,000, that's a red flag. Yeah.
So one of the things, like the ones that I know that are legitimate, because I've run in the same circle with the people that run these presses, but Spark Press and She Writes Press, which is I think a subsect of Spark Press. that's a legitimate one, and they have a pretty stringent submissions policy. So you submit it, and you either get a red light, a yellow light, or a green light. The red light is nope, you're not ready. circle back around when you've done some more work. The yellow light is okay, you're almost ready. Your book still needs some editorial work, right? And so they will refer you oftentimes to a coach or an editor, developmental editor, and they'll send you there and say, come back to us when you're done. Or the green light means essentially like you're ready for your copy editing, you're ready for your proofreading, you're ready for your design work, like you're ready to roll. And so let's see. Do you see any questions in here that?
I think we've covered everything unless there's anything new. I was scrolling backwards here for a while.
Okay, so this is one. You say a finished manuscript. Mine is a minimum of 3 books. Plan for more individual dragons ones. 2 of them are done. Should I wait or start now? I would say if book 1 stands on its own, then go ahead and submit. That is, I know typically like that's what I've heard about series. Although I recently read that Dungeon Crawler Carl. Have you heard of this book?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so it's like a series of a whole bunch of books, and it's a guy who the world collapses. It's one of these like game lit books, RPG lit, right? So like the world collapses and this alien dungeon opens, and if you want to play the game and not like live on the dying surface of the earth, like you enter the dungeon. And so like every so many levels is a new book.
Okay.
Right? But there's book 1 does not stand alone on its own, right? And it's traditionally published, but the guy who writes it, this was not his first novel, by the way. And I think that's important. But I read book 1 expecting for it to end and something be resolved so I could decide, did I want to pick up book 2?
Right.
And it did not. It ended on like the equivalent of like mid-sentence. And I got so mad. But if you have a book 1 that stands on its own, and I think that's the important part, I would go ahead and submit it. If your books all one feeds into the next, and like Matt Dinian, you stop mid-sentence and then want to like push you on to book 2, then maybe wait until you have, I think, enough that stands on its own then that you can submit it. Would you say the same thing, Alisa?
Yeah, especially for a debut, that idea, and I put this in the chat, that like is a standalone with series potential. Like that's what you want to tell an agent or a small press, that like this book, if somebody picked it up and read it and they were done, they finish a story, like there could be something else that comes along. I think that's the best. There's always exceptions, of course. But that's probably your best foot forward. If it's an agent or even a press, like that's a great thing to talk about when you talk to that person about representation or about publishing, to bring that up. Like, I have these other 3 already written, or I have outlines for 25 books, like whatever it is. I think that's the point to bring it up. You don't want to get discounted in the review process because they're like, oh, we don't want a series, we just want 1, so you kind of do yourself a disservice if you're trying to.
And you can't really pitch book 2 or book 3, right? Especially if they hinge on book 1 to make sense. I would think you couldn't pitch book 2 or 3 without having at least pitched book 1 first, right? Like that's got to be.
I think so.
Oh, and here I have seen several presses that say they're looking for poetry collections. As a matter of fact, I think I saw one that's all they take is poetry anthologies, poetry collections. And I have not yet seen an agent asking specifically for poetry. Have you, Alisa? I don't pay much attention though, because I usually scan just looking for my own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're out there, but
I do too. But
harder. That's going to be harder to find. I think you'll have more luck with small presses versus agents if you're only focused on poetry. If you have kind of a mix, you might have a better luck with agent.
Yeah, and I think I put a couple of poetry ones over in the Storycraft Cafe. I think I put a couple underneath that thread. So take a look there. So let's see, that's you. B is still sorting through those 55 pages of small publishers. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I noticed I hadn't yet come across one that did a lot of mystery. I noticed my mystery comment in my thread that I did was empty of any small presses. So I want to go back through and see if I can't find some mystery ones. So let's see.
Yeah, those are definitely harder. But yeah. Yeah, and Kara made a good point about the press reaching out to you and asking you to pay, and that sucks. I'm so sorry that you had to experience that, because that is terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, a huge red flag there.
Yeah. I agree. So SY says Jericho Writers has a sortable agent matching feature as part of their subscription. Yeah, I see Jericho Writers all over the place. I think my friend Bree did a whole thing with them for a year. She was part of some, I think, kind of like cohort group.
And Wishlist does events like that, or offers opportunities to talk with agents. You're not pitching them unless it's a pitching thing, but definitely check that out too.
And I'm pretty sure Manuscript Writer or Manuscript Wishlist has a way to sort that you can see. You might be able to see some presses or editors there.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Readsy, I found, had a way to sort as well. So there are some reputable, aggregate of writers that will allow you to go in and sort their content and find these presses as well. So let's see. What else? Do you see anything I'm missing?
I think that might cover the question. Some good information in the chat about NJ was saying they publish through Barnes & Noble, but everything is left up to you. Absolutely. Lessening the workload, asking about that. I mean, other than hiring someone, it is really hard, but you might find some good luck in getting a cover person, having someone who can format. I mean, you can buy software, but if this is a one and done kind of thing, do you really want to spend that? Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, there's no way easily to lessen that without spending money. It's kind of like, do you want to do it all yourself? Is less expensive. If you need to farm things out, then that gets kind of pricey.
Okay, so just these are all kind of put together. So I think NJ might have come in right at the end as we were talking about it. We'll touch on this briefly, because then I know also the snake. It's recommended to pitch a series, or would standalone be better instead? And then, NJ said she likes to end in cliffhangers. Is it all right for a first book? So, I mean, we can give you the general advice, right? Which is what we said. There are always exceptions to the rule. Your book might be an exception. There might be something that you're trying to do. Like I said, Matt Dinian did not end on a cliffhanger. He just ended it. Like, it was just like, oh, we're going on to the next level now. And so level collapse, and that was it. You can end in a cliffhanger and wrap up the point of the first book all at the same time. So the way I was told, if you wanted to set up for book 2, right? Even if you've got this overarching quest. So like, let's say you're on a quest to gather the 3 gems to rule them all, right? So book 1 is about finding the first gem. And you find the first gem, but then you could kickstart the second book and leave the action on some big question that makes the reader go, oh, well, they found the first one, but oh my gosh, there's your cliffhanger to launch the second book. So like that's I think the most simplistic way that I can sort of put it. So you have some piece of book 1 that gets completely wrapped up and tied in a little bow so that you satisfy the reader, but then give them just enough of the next piece that makes them want to pick up the second book. Is that, what do you think, Alisa?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Having that standalone with series potential, like that's what you're going for. And again, that's a great thing to talk about when you get your call.
Yep.
To say like, look, it ends like this, which like if you've read it, but I have these other ideas. That's a great opportunity to talk about that. For a debut, it's like they're looking for you to get a story that's complete. If you look at a lot of series, I'm a huge fantasy reader as well. I can see on my bookshelf, the first book is not huge, and then the second one's a little bigger, and the third one's like, it's like as the popularity expands, as readership expands, and you get a little bit more leeway to do some of that stuff that maybe your first book contract isn't going to allow you to do. But those are great things to talk about with your agent or with the press. A press may be slightly more interested in a series just because they want to be able to keep putting out books. So if they really love your concept, I think then that's maybe more likely.
Yeah, they think it'll sell, I think, and that's the big thing. I mean, that's the part about this that kind of hurts sometimes. It's like, it's the business. Yeah, absolutely. So Bob had a question right here. I have one poetry book self-published, but I have more to write. I combine poems with humorous memoirs. Oh, I think that's fantastic. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I mean, I would guess, and I'm just guessing here, right? Either you're going to find a small press that takes both poetry and memoir, right? Or you're going to be able to pitch that to one or pitch it to the other. So you might actually double the number of presses that you can find, because if you're pitching it to the press that takes poetry, you're going to really like lean in on your query letter about the poems, right? Make poems like the biggest part, and then like weave in the humorous memoirs. But if you're writing to the press that takes the memoirs, you're going to really focus in on the memoir portion of your book and say, and I weave in, my poems with the structure. And so, I mean, I think humorous memoirs, I'm all about that.
I like that. It's a nice combination that you don't really see a lot. I mean, there's a danger in not really seeing it a lot, because is there a reason you don't see it a lot? But I think that that's a nice way to highlight, two different kind of forms of writing together.
Yeah, I think that sounds really fun. And I love, those are really the only memoirs I'll read are the ones that are humorous. I love that. Who is the guy who walked across Europe? Why can't I think of his name?
I'm not familiar.
Oh my gosh. I can't, I've read every one of his books, and he did the Thunderbolt Kid, Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid. Bill Bryson. Oh my God. I was like really losing it there for a second. Bill Bryson. He's the guy, I can't remember his name. He's one of my favorites. All right. Well, that's taken us up. Yeah, that's why you got me here in the chat, Bill Bryson. This is taking us right up to 1 o'clock. So good. If anybody has any more questions, the replay to this, if you missed the first part, or we've got a Hail Mary question that has come in. Should we take the last one before we wrap it up? I haven't even read it yet. I've written a few children's books, but I have trouble finding an illustrator. Would these presses help me get one, or is that an agent thing? Oh, okay. So no, typically your agent is not the one who finds your illustrator. The press is the one that finds the illustrator. So illustrators have agents as well. And so if you're writing a children's book, children's authors and illustrators, if you are not an author illustrator yourself, authors and illustrators both hold the same weight for children's books. And so I think most of the time, unless you're really famous, you don't really get much of a say, right, in who illustrates your book.
They'll choose
they choose it.
Illustrator. If you're pitching agents, it is harder right now to find one if you're not an illustrator also, but you can. They usually want 5 or 6 books, the manuscript part for those books when you pitch them, so that they have a better sense of like what style you're writing in, or if there's, series are huge in like kids picture books, so that too. But then the illustrator is chosen separately from that during the like publishing process.
I just took a class with Sarah Rivers, who's an agent, and she specifically addressed author only picture books in the class. And she said that you pitch her with 1 book, but you need to have 2 more in your back pocket, because when she calls you to say, I'm interested, she's also going to say to you, show me the rest of what you have. And the one author that she used as the illustration in this class, she said she pitched me her only finished picture book, which I loved. I asked her what else she had, and she showed me drafts of 2 others that she had worked on in the past. And she got picked up by Sarah. So, but you're right in that typically children's picture books are just like children's chapter books are another one. Oftentimes they take those in bundles. And kids' chapter books, just like picture books, if a kid picks one up and reads it and loves it, they want to read all of them. And so you got to keep those masses fed. So,
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that about does us for today. If you guys get off and you think of any questions, which is like the only time I ever think of questions during a class or a workshop is when it's over, go ahead and head over to the Storycraft Cafe, log in, leave us a question. Alisa or I both, you can tag one of us, you could tag both of us, but leave a question and we'll answer it and we will keep the conversation going. So good luck, you guys. If you decide to pitch a small press, let us know that in the community too, because we'll cheer you on and be there to support everybody. So thank you everybody for coming, and we will see you next week on YouTube. I think we have like 4 more events next week. So nice. Bye everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, don't you love the way I hit end stream and then it doesn't end? It's so awkward. Let me hit it again.